For 3 years, Rachel lived in a beautiful house that felt more like a museum. There was no love. Barely any warmth. Just polite distance and silence that stretched like a wall. She was married but never truly chosen. Ignored. Unseen. Until one morning her cold husband, New York's most admired CEO, looked at her for the first time and said, "You're coming with me to the gala." The day Rachel signed the marriage papers, the sky over Brooklyn was gray and unmoving. Her parents didn't look at her, not directly. Her mother folded her hands on the table, trembling slightly. Her father paced by the window like he was trying to outrun guilt. Rachel sat still, staring at the pen in front of her like it was a weapon. "This isn't love," she said quietly. Her mother flinched but said nothing. Her father spoke instead. "It's survival." Coal Industries had been a client of her family's small accounting firm for years. But when the economy dipped, a few bad investments brought them to the edge of bankruptcy. Then came this solution. The Coal family would bail them out. Wipe the debt. No lawsuits. No prison. No shame. In return, Rachel would marry Ethan Coal, heir to one of the most powerful corporations in the country. She met Ethan exactly once before the wedding. It was more of a briefing than a conversation. He wore a charcoal gray suit, spoke in clipped, emotionless sentences and barely looked at her. "I expect discretion," he said. "Public appearances only when necessary. Other than that, we stay out of each other's way." Rachel stared at him, trying to find some trace of kindness. There was none. Only calculation. On paper he was perfect, young, rich, brilliant, clean-cut. But in person he felt like a locked door. She remembered walking out of that meeting with her throat dry and her hands shaking. She wanted to scream but she didn't. She wanted to run but she had nowhere to go. 3 days later she wore a white dress and signed her name next to his. The wedding was cold, quick and corporate. No flowers. No vows. Just a contract and champagne that tasted like metal. They moved into a luxury penthouse overlooking the East River. Rachel had her own bedroom down the hall. Ethan worked late. Every night. If they passed each other in the hallway, it was like strangers brushing shoulders in an airport. "Morning," he might say. "Evening," she'd reply. That was it. No questions. No connection. In the first 6 months they didn't eat a single meal together. Not breakfast. Not dinner. She cooked for herself. Quietly. Always before 6 a.m. before he came down. He liked black coffee and silence. She learned that early. She also learned not to ask questions. Once she asked if he'd be home for the holidays. He looked at her like she'd asked about the weather on Mars. "I'll be traveling," he said. "Board meetings." She nodded and lit a candle alone on Christmas Eve. There were no arguments. Because there was nothing to argue about. No closeness. No expectations. Just polite distance. Rachel tried to stay busy. She read books, walked in the park, called her mom. But slowly she began to disappear inside herself. The girl who used to laugh loudly and dance barefoot in the kitchen became a shadow. Sometimes she wondered if Ethan even remembered her name. Once she passed by his office and heard him on a call. "She's my wife." Yes, technically. Technically. That word rang in her chest like an alarm. One night, she opened the drawer in her bedroom and found the wedding photo someone had printed for her. They weren't even standing close in the picture. Ethan's hand hovered near hers, never quite touching. Rachel put the photo face down. By the end of the 3rd year, Rachel knew every sound in the house. The elevator ding at 7:03, the hum of the espresso machine, the click of Ethan's shoes on the hardwood floor. But she no longer remembered the sound of her own laughter. That was the day she looked at herself in the mirror and whispered, "I don't even know who I am anymore." And then, the next morning, everything changed. She came downstairs early as always. Only this time Ethan was already in the kitchen. Suit pressed. Eyes unreadable. And he said 5 words that made her stop breathing for a second. "You're coming with me tonight." Rachel didn't sleep that night. After Ethan left the kitchen, she sat at the dining table long after her coffee went cold. He hadn't said please. He hadn't explained why, beyond strategy. And yet, he had spoken more to her in that kitchen than he had in the last 6 months. She didn't know what unsettled her more. The fact that he'd finally noticed her. Or the suspicion that she was still just part of a performance. By morning, her nerves had calcified into defiance. If he wanted a wife on display, he would get one, but on her terms. Rachel opened her closet and scanned the row of unused dresses. Each one still had a price tag, a memory that never happened. She reached for the navy blue gown, not because it was perfect but because it was hers. Bought before the wedding. Back when she still believed she'd be seen. She had it tailored herself that afternoon. Changed the neckline. Adjusted the fit. Took back ownership of the way she would enter that room. At 6:58 p.m., Rachel stood in front of the full-length mirror in the hallway. Hair curled softly, lips dark red, shoulders bare. For the first time in years, she looked like someone she recognized. But as the elevator dinged outside the apartment, a sudden wave of doubt washed over her. What was she walking into? Would they stare? Would Ethan ignore her even there? Would she become visible, only to be dismissed again? She picked up her clutch. Told herself not to care. Then stepped out the door before her fear could catch up. The car was already waiting downstairs. The driver opened the door wordlessly. Inside, Ethan sat in silence, one hand resting on his knee, the other checking his watch. He looked up when she entered. Pause. Barely a blink. Then, right on time. That was all. Rachel nodded, settled into her seat, and turned to the window. The city blurred past, glowing under early evening lights. For once, she didn't feel like an outsider looking in. She felt ready. Not to impress him. Not to prove anything. Just to exist, fully, confidently, in a world she'd been pushed to the edges of. As they neared the venue, Rachel spoke, not looking at Ethan. Have you ever thought about what it feels like to walk into a room where no one expects you to matter? Ethan turned his head slightly. I've walked into rooms where everyone expects too much. I don't know which is worse. Rachel blinked. That wasn't the answer she expected. She didn't respond. But for a brief moment they sat in silence that wasn't hostile, just honest. The car pulled up in front of the Lexington Grand. Photographers stood outside, lights flashing as guests arrived. Ethan stepped out first, then extended a hand to Rachel. She took it, not because she needed help, but because tonight they would walk in together. The flashbulbs flared. Rachel didn't blink. She held her chin steady, her expression composed. In the background someone whispered, "Is that Ethan Cole's wife?" She heard it. And for the first time in years she didn't shrink. She met every eye. Walked beside Ethan, not behind him. And thought, let them see me. They had barely made it past the grand staircase when a man broke from the crowd and approached Ethan. "Cole," he greeted warmly, extending a hand. "Didn't expect to see you tonight." Ethan gave a professional nod. "Julian." The man's attention shifted. "And you must be Rachel." Rachel offered her hand. "I must." Julian Hart smiled, just slightly crooked, the kind of smile that suggested he saw more than he said. "I've heard you speak Spanish fluently." Rachel blinked. "I do. French as well." "I need both," he replied smoothly. "And someone who understands emerging markets." He looked back to Ethan. "You never said your wife was fluent in international strategy." "She's not working," Ethan said quickly. Julian didn't blink. "That's a shame. The field's missing out." Rachel smiled. "Not for charm, for control." Julian leaned closer, his tone low enough for only her to hear. "Would you ever consider coming back to work?" "Depends who's asking." Julian laughed, a real soft laugh, and offered his card. Ethan moved before Rachel could take it. "She won't be available." Rachel's fingers froze mid-reach. Julian tilted his head. "Didn't realize her calendar was on your phone." Rachel looked at her husband, not with anger, but clarity. "I can manage my own schedule," she said. And then she took the card. The rest of the conversation blurred. Rachel smiled politely, but her mind stayed fixed on one thing, the tension in Ethan's voice. Not business tension. Personal. Possessive. She'd never heard it before. She wasn't sure what it meant. But it meant something. They moved through the room, conversations, introductions, small talk, but the air between them had shifted. When Ethan introduced her to the chairman of a global venture firm, Rachel shook the man's hand and answered questions with ease. She could feel Ethan watching her. Not as a chaperone. As if he were evaluating someone he'd never met. And for the first time, maybe he was. By the time dessert was being passed, Rachel stood at the far end of the ballroom, speaking with two female executives about gender equity in finance. It was natural. Unforced. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just being who she was, who she had always been before the silence. Ethan stood 10 feet away watching. He didn't interrupt. Didn't call her over. But his jaw was tight and he hadn't taken a sip of his scotch in 10 minutes. When she glanced at him, their eyes locked across the crowd. And in that moment Rachel realized. She wasn't the only one being seen tonight. He was too. And he didn't like it. They didn't speak in the car. Not a single word. Ethan stared out the window, his jaw set. Rachel sat upright, hands in her lap, not fidgeting, just still. But inside, her thoughts spun like a storm held behind glass. 3 years of silence. 3 years of patience. 3 years of pretending she didn't mind. Tonight cracked something open. And now, she couldn't put the pieces back. The elevator ride was short but heavy. When they stepped into the penthouse, Ethan moved first, toward his office. "Don't," Rachel said. He froze. She had never used that tone with him before. He turned slowly. She didn't raise her voice. But she didn't lower her eyes either. "Not this time," she said. "You don't get to hide behind spreadsheets and scotch tonight." Ethan didn't respond. So she stepped forward. "I need you to look at me," she said. And for once he did. Her voice didn't tremble. She didn't pace. Didn't shout. She just stood there, calm, steady, undeniable. "You married me because it made sense," she said. "You kept me around because I didn't get in your way." Ethan stayed silent. "And maybe I let that happen," Rachel continued. "Maybe I thought if I was quiet enough, polite enough, small enough, one day you'd notice me." She took a breath. "But tonight? I realized something." Ethan blinked. "What?" "I don't need to be noticed," she said. "I need to be respected." Ethan stepped forward, but Rachel raised a hand. "Don't come closer," she said. "Not until you understand this part." He stopped. "I'm not a contract," she said. "I'm not a favor to your father. I'm not a piece of decor you pull out for investor events." She stared at him like she was daring him to interrupt. He didn't. "I've spent 3 years trying not to make waves. But Ethan, I'm done treading water." He rubbed the back of his neck. A gesture she rarely saw, nervous, uncertain. "You're right," he said. "I didn't know what to do with you." Rachel gave a bitter laugh. "You make me sound like a couch you didn't order." "I didn't mean it like that." "You didn't mean anything, Ethan. That's the problem. For 3 years you didn't mean anything. You just existed next to me." She crossed her arms. "And I let it happen. But not anymore." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then, "You were brilliant tonight." That caught her off guard. "You didn't belong next to me," he added. "You belonged in front of me." Rachel blinked, not expecting praise. But she didn't soften. "That doesn't erase the rest," she said. "I know," he replied. He stepped closer. This time she let him. "I didn't think you wanted anything from me," he said quietly. "You were so self-contained." Rachel tilted her head. "And what? That made it easier not to care." "No," he said. "It made it easier to pretend I didn't." Silence hung between them. Heavy. Raw. Then Rachel spoke. "I'm not asking you to love me, Ethan." His brow furrowed. "You're not." "No," she said. "I'm asking you to stop treating me like I'm invisible." He looked down. Then back up. "I see you now," he said. And for the first time Rachel believed he meant it. But belief wasn't trust. Not yet. She turned toward the bedroom. Paused. "You don't get to unhear this tomorrow morning," she said. "You don't get to pretend it didn't happen." "I won't," he said. "I've changed, Ethan." "I noticed." She nodded once, then disappeared down the hall. And Ethan? He didn't follow. He stood there in the quiet, realizing that silence used to be safe. But not anymore. Now it was loud. And filled with the sound of everything he never said. The next morning, Rachel found Ethan standing in the kitchen, already dressed. He hadn't slept. His tie was crooked, a rare sign of distraction. He didn't look up when she entered. "Don't meet with Julian." The words landed like a stone on polished tile. Rachel poured coffee slowly. "I didn't say I was going to. But you're thinking about it." She stirred her cup. "And if I am?" Ethan finally turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were anything but calm. "He's not just offering you a job." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "And you're not just offering me silence." He looked like he wanted to argue. But she didn't give him the chance. "I don't need your permission to talk to anyone, Ethan." "I know. I don't need your approval to feel valuable again." "I didn't say you did." "Then why are we having this conversation?" Ethan took a step closer. "Because I don't trust his intentions." "And do you trust mine?" That stopped him. Rachel set down her cup. "For 3 years you didn't care where I went, who I spoke to, or what I did. I didn't think you wanted me to." "You're right. I didn't." She crossed her arms. "But that's not the point." Ethan's jaw flexed. "Then what is?" Rachel met his gaze. "The point is, you don't get to wake up one day and decide you're my husband just because someone else noticed I exist." Silence. The kind that pushes all the air out of the room. Rachel stood there, her voice steady but her chest tight. Ethan blinked slowly. "You think this is about territory?" "I think this is about control," she said. "And I'm done being someone you manage." Ethan sat down at the counter, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I'm not used to this version of you. This version was always here. You just weren't looking." He looked up. And what Rachel saw in his face wasn't anger. It was fear. Not of losing a fight, but of losing something he hadn't realized mattered. "You're really considering working with him?" "I'm considering working. Period." Ethan nodded slowly. "And if it's him? Then it's him." Her voice didn't shake. "I won't let your jealousy define my worth, Ethan." He stood. Moved toward her, slower this time. "I'm not trying to control you," he said quietly. Rachel tilted her head. "Then what are you doing?" He hesitated. "Trying not to lose you." It wasn't a declaration. It was an admission. Soft, raw, human. Rachel's breath caught just slightly. She didn't move. Didn't answer. But for the first time Ethan didn't fill the silence. He stood there letting it hang between them. Letting her choose what came next. Rachel wasn't looking for anything. She just needed a pen. Ethan had a whole drawer full of them in his office. Black, sleek, perfectly lined. She rarely stepped inside that room. It felt like his territory. A place for numbers and control and late-night silence. But that morning he had left in a rush and she had a stack of forms to sign. So she stepped in. And opened the wrong drawer. The folder wasn't labeled. Just thick, clean. Clipped with a gold pin. She meant to close it. But something, maybe instinct, maybe habit, made her flip it open. And that's when she saw it. A contract. Not hers. Not directly. But about her. Her name. Her parents' company. The date of their wedding. Line after line of corporate terms. Clauses. Stipulations. An agreement that tied their marriage to a strategic merger between Cole Enterprises and her family's firm. Rachel's hands began to shake. She read the part about public appearances. About the 5-year marriage minimum. About the equity split if a child was born. She kept reading even when the words blurred. Even when she stopped breathing. 10 minutes later she sat on the floor, folder open beside her, phone in hand. She didn't call Ethan. She called her mother. It rang twice. "Rachel, sweetie. Everything okay?" Her voice cracked. "Tell me the truth." Pause. "What is this about?" "I found the merger documents, Mom." Silence. "I found out I was part of the contract." The line went quiet. Then her mother exhaled, a sound between guilt and surrender. "We didn't want to lie to you. But you did. We didn't have a choice." You always had a choice, Rachel said. You just didn't choose me. She hung up before her mother could say anything else. Then she stood. Her body moved without decision, just pure reaction. Upstairs. Closet. Small suitcase. She packed without thinking. Just a few things. Nothing that felt like theirs. By the time Ethan called, she was already on the street. Rachel? His voice was tight. Where are you? She didn't answer. She just said, I read the documents. The pause on the line was heavy. I can explain. I don't want an explanation. Then what do you want? She stopped walking. People brushed past her on the sidewalk, the world spinning as if nothing had changed. I want to know what was real, she said. Was any of it real? I didn't. She ended the call and kept walking. She checked into a hotel with no reservation, no plan, no lies. Just her own name. Rachel Rivers. No hyphen. No Cole. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. The ache in her chest didn't come from Ethan. Not just him. It came from the feeling of being sold twice. Once by the man who married her. And once by the people who raised her. Ethan didn't go home that night. He sat in his office until morning. Lights off, blinds shut, the city blinking faintly beyond the glass. Rachel was gone. Not for an hour. Not in anger. She had left the way someone leaves when they're finally done hoping. By 7 a.m. he had read the contract 3 times. The one she'd found. The one that tied their marriage to numbers, dates, projections, and silent expectations. Every clause now felt like a nail in something already buried. He didn't sleep. He didn't drink. He just sat in the dark, staring at the pages like they were a confession he hadn't written, but had signed anyway. At 9 a.m. he walked into the boardroom at Cole Enterprises. The entire senior executive team was already there. His father was seated at the head of the table. Ethan, Robert Cole said. You called an emergency? I'm dissolving the merger with Rivers Accounting. Silence. Then chaos. Voices overlapped. What? Wait, what the hell are you talking about? That merger is worth. Million. Our expansion into private equity. Ethan raised a hand. I know what it's worth. His father stood, voice sharp. You don't walk away from a 10-figure deal because of personal drama. I'm not walking away because of drama, Ethan said. I'm walking away because the deal was never clean to begin with. Robert narrowed his eyes. This marriage stabilized both companies. No. It stabilized our image. The result is the same. Not if it was built on manipulation. Are you accusing me of lying? Ethan looked straight at him. I'm accusing all of us of forgetting she's a human being. The room fell silent. One of the younger partners, cautious, curious, asked quietly, Are you sure about this? Ethan's voice didn't waver. I'm sure. He pulled out a document from his case. A dissolution draft. Signed. All it needed was approval. I want the company returned to the Rivers family in full. Even the capital infusion? Someone asked. Let them keep it. Robert stared at him. You're choosing a woman over a legacy. I'm choosing integrity over convenience. No one will see it that way. Rachel will. Robert stepped forward, voice low but sharp. This is weakness. Ethan met his father's stare. No. This is strength. He left the room before anyone else could speak. Before anyone could stop him. He didn't need applause. He just needed it to be done. Later that day he drove across the bridge to a small house in Queens. He had only been there once, 3 years ago. Back then he hadn't cared to ask whose name was on the mailbox. Today he knocked on the door and waited. Rachel's father answered, surprised and hesitant. Mr. Cole? Ethan. I didn't expect. I'm not here to make things worse. David Rivers glanced behind him, then opened the door wider. Come in. The living room was modest. Neat. Quiet. Sarah Rivers sat at the edge of the sofa, holding a teacup that trembled slightly. Neither of them smiled. Rachel's not here, Sarah said. I know, Ethan replied. I'm not looking for her. Then why are you here? He looked at both of them. I wanted you to know. The merger is over. Their eyes widened. We're giving the company back. Everything. Assets, contracts, capital, no strings attached. Silence. You're serious? David asked. I'm sure of it. Why? Sarah asked softly. Ethan swallowed. Because I finally realized something. He took a breath. She wasn't part of a deal. She was the cost of it. And I never asked what that cost meant, for her or for you. I just signed the papers. He looked down. And she paid the price. No one spoke for a while. Then David nodded slowly. Thank you. Sarah said nothing. But she didn't need to. The quiet in the room wasn't angry anymore. It was clean. Like something had finally been lifted. Ethan stood. If she reaches out, just tell her she doesn't owe me anything. David looked him in the eye. But maybe now, she'll believe you mean it. Ethan gave a quiet nod. And left. The nausea started on the fourth morning. Rachel thought it was stress. Hotel coffee. Too much silence. Too many thoughts. She skipped breakfast, drank water, opened the windows. But on the fifth morning, when the smell of toast from the hallway made her rush to the bathroom, she knew it wasn't nerves. Something deeper was shifting. Something real. She bought 3 pregnancy tests from a corner pharmacy 2 blocks away. No makeup. No sunglasses. Just a hoodie and a hope that no one would recognize her. In the hotel bathroom, she lined the tests up like soldiers on the sink. Then sat on the floor and waited. 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. All 3 tests turned positive. She didn't cry. Not at first. She stared at the thin pink lines like they belonged to someone else. Then, slowly, the weight of it settled in. Inside her, a beginning. Unplanned. Unspoken. Undeniable. A new life was growing. And she didn't know what to do with that truth. She spent the next day walking. Nowhere specific. Through the park. Along quiet streets. Into bookstores she didn't enter. Everything felt too big. Or maybe she felt too small. At one point she sat on a bench and whispered to herself, I'm going to be a mother. The words didn't scare her. But they didn't comfort her either. Not yet. That evening she picked up her phone. The screen still held Ethan's last missed call. She hadn't blocked him. She just hadn't wanted to hear anything that might sound like another speech. But this wasn't just about her anymore. So she typed one line. We need to talk. In person. He replied within 2 minutes. Where and when? She stared at the screen for a while, then wrote. Our place. Tomorrow night. The house was quiet when she arrived. Too quiet. Rachel let herself in with the spare key still on her ring. Everything was exactly where she left it, even the scarf she dropped near the coat rack the day she walked out. Nothing had changed. And yet, somehow, everything had. Ethan was already home. He was waiting in the living room, no tie, sleeves rolled like he'd been pacing for hours. When she stepped in, he stood. They didn't hug. Didn't speak. She sat first. He waited. Why did you give it up? She asked. Straight to the point. Ethan didn't flinch. Because I was wrong. She looked at him. Really looked. He wasn't defensive. Just tired. Exposed. About what? He took a breath. About what matters. He explained everything. The board meeting. The argument with his father. The transfer of ownership. No conditions. No PR spin. Just surrender. For the first time, Ethan hadn't negotiated. He had let go. Rachel listened without interrupting. Then finally said, You didn't do that for business. No. You did that for me. Yes. And not because you had to. No. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said the thing she hadn't said out loud all day. I'm pregnant. Ethan didn't move. Didn't speak. Then he sat down across from her, very slowly. Are you okay? I think so. And the baby? It's early. He nodded. Then looked at her in a way she hadn't seen before. Gentle. So. Full of something unspoken. Thank you for telling me. Rachel exhaled. I don't know what this means yet. You don't have to. They sat in silence. Not the cold silence of before. This one was human. Breathing. Rachel touched her stomach. For the first time, not with fear, but awareness. Then she looked at Ethan and said, "I'm not ready to come back. I understand. But I needed to know if any of this was real." He met her eyes. "It is." She stood. He didn't try to stop her. But as she reached for the door, she paused. "Maybe this baby was supposed to happen now," she said. Ethan stepped forward, slowly. "And maybe, it's the beginning we didn't know we needed." She didn't answer. But she didn't walk out either. Not yet. They didn't rush back into it. There was no dramatic reunion. No sweeping apologies. Just small conversations. Late-night texts that turned into coffee. Walks in the park that ended in silence but never awkwardness. Slowly the distance softened. Not because it was convenient, but because something new was growing, not just in Rachel but between them. 3 months passed before she said, "I think I'm ready to come home." And Ethan didn't ask what she meant. He just nodded, opened the car door, and drove her there. The house didn't feel cold anymore. Maybe it was her presence. Maybe it was his effort. Maybe, finally, they had both stopped hiding. They shared a kitchen now, and a calendar, and plans. Not for press conferences or quarterly growth, but for furniture, doctor visits, baby names. Their lives became a series of shared moments, not obligations. Ethan didn't try to impress her anymore. He tried to understand her. He showed up for every appointment, held her hand through every test, cooked dinner, badly but with intention. He was still Ethan. But now, he was reachable. And Rachel? She wasn't quiet anymore. She asked for what she needed. She said no when she meant no. And for the first time she laughed in that house. Really laughed. One rainy afternoon she found a note on her pillow. No flowers. No audience. Just us and a choice we make this time. Marry me again? She smiled, wiped a tear, then went downstairs and said, "Only if you let me write the vows this time." He looked at her like she was everything he never knew he wanted. Deal. The second ceremony had no ballroom, no cameras, no board members. Just a quiet rooftop, 2 rings, and words that came from the deepest part of them both. Rachel stood under string lights, her belly round with new life, and said, "I married you once because I thought I had to. I'm marrying you now because I choose to." Ethan took her hand, looked into eyes he finally understood, and said, "I built empires. But you made me a man." 9 weeks later their son was born. No press release. No announcement. Just the sound of a newborn's first cry and the way Ethan's hands trembled when he held him. Rachel looked up at him, sweaty and exhausted, and whispered, "We made something real." He kissed her forehead. "You made something real." Their baby's name was Elijah. No legacy. No corporate meaning. Elijah. He came into a world that was messy, loud, imperfect, but honest, and loved. They went home 3 days later. Not to a mansion, but to a home, with laundry on the floor, warm bottles in the sink, and a marriage that wasn't written in a contract, but rewritten in every ordinary, sacred, real moment after. In a small office in downtown Manhattan, a new sign reads, "Cole and Rivers Consulting." Inside, Rachel reviews a contract with quiet focus. Across the room, Ethan gently rocks their baby boy to sleep, one hand on the cradle, the other holding a coffee she made him. No assistants. No cameras. Just life. Soft. Real. Chosen. Sometimes, the person you married for all the wrong reasons becomes the one you love for all the right ones. What would you have done in Rachel's place? Like if you believe in second chances. Subscribe to SoulTales for more cinematic stories of love, healing, and growth. And don't forget to turn on the bell. Your next favorite story might be just one click away.